All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this CSPC workshop called Science Shared Simply, Quick Tools to Increase Impact, Relevance, and Retention. Even though we are meeting today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land on which we all call home. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the treaty lands, the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people who are the ancestral caregivers and storytellers on this land. Myself and my other two presenters, Cass and RC, are all joining you from our offices in Ottawa, which is built upon the unceded Algonquin-Anishinaabe territory. Now, before we jump in, there's just a couple of housekeeping notes I want to bring up really quickly. First off, this panel is being held in meeting format, which means everybody can turn on and off their mics and camera at will. So just, be aware that that is a power that you have. And if you do have questions, for example, during the breakout sessions, you will be able to unmute yourself to be able to ask them. And then also the chat feature is just going to be available the whole time as well. And with that, I'd just like to thank CSPC for hosting us, thank all of the speakers for being here. And now I'm going to tell you just a couple of things about us. So your three workshop facilitators today are myself, Michelle Campbell-McCarskey, Dr. Cassandra Marion, and also René-Claude Goulet. And we are the three science advisors at Ingenium, who are Canada's Museums of Science and Innovation. Now at Ingenium, we have three museums. You might have heard of us or even been to us maybe, but that is the Canada Science and Technology Museum, where I work, the Canadian Aviation and Space Museum, where Cassandra works, and the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum, where RC works. So all three of these museums are located in the National Capital, and we hold the National Collection of Science and Innovation Objects. At Ingenium, it's our mandate to unlock curiosity and creativity and to increase scientific literacy and trust in science by taking science engagement, science communication, and some science fun to the next level. So that's a little about us. We'd like to hear a little bit more about you. So I believe Trudy's about to post a 2-question poll in the chat. If everybody could take a quick moment to fill that out. So by the end of this workshop, we're hoping to leave you with a couple of very concrete tools that you should be able to use to create communication projects on any of the projects you might be working on. We hope that the tools we give you today can help your communication products be clear, accessible, targeted, and most importantly, actually achieve the goals that you have for them. You should leave this workshop feeling like you actually know how to start these projects and to have a really good idea of how to get going in a way that's going to work for you. So with that, let's launch in. I'll start by saying we're museum folks. We all work at museums, and museums are known for communication. And at science museums, obviously, we're known for science communication. We have a lot of different communication products. We do school programs and lesson plans, demonstrations, but we're probably best known for our exhibitions. Now, I'll let you know a little secret, but exhibitions cost a lot of money to make. They take a lot of hours and a lot of resources and a lot of people. So how do we decide when we're making an exhibition or any other product, what we actually want to include or do? If I'm sitting down to create an exhibition like the one on your screen, which is all about technology in the home, how do I decide what to include? What artifacts to show? What stories to share? How much text there should be and on what? Should it be serious? Should it be silly? Do I want to have demonstrations? Do I want to have interactives? Now, before we get to all of that, the first thing we do in all of our planning is answer 3 questions. What is my goal? What is my key message? And who is my audience? And once we're able to successfully answer these questions, everything else actually kind of starts answering itself, which is great. It's very helpful. So that's what we're going to walk you through today is those first 3 questions that we ask. And then we're going to finish by giving you a couple of tips for when you actually get to building and designing that communication product. So here to take you away with our first tool is RC.
Hello, everybody. So the first tool, so these tools we'll present can be used sequentially to craft your communication piece. And as Michelle said, it's all things we use in the museum world and as science communicators. Some of you may already do a lot of this, maybe consciously or maybe without realizing. But today we're hoping that this can help us think maybe in a different way when we're crafting our communication. So before we start crafting anything, the first thing we have to do is understand our own communication goals. So our goals need to be specific. To communicate is not really specific enough. It doesn't give us any further information to go on. So when we're going to identify our communication goals, then once we've come to it, it'll be the foundation on which we will build our communication piece. So when we're talking about communication goals, maybe we can go to the next slide. So what are some of the goals of our communication? Or to ask differently, what do we want the outcome of our communication to be? So for example, is it to inform and teach? Or is it to help, to connect? Is it to convince, persuade, change behavior? For example, a customer buying a product. Is it to promote, advertise? To maybe entertain. So these are all kind of final outcomes of our communication, and it's important to identify them before we even get started with anything. Maybe you have dual communication goals. Maybe it's to teach and entertain. That is fine, but it's really important to understand what we want to achieve with this and our desired outcome. So we can go, so our goals will affect how and what we communicate. So for example, the vehicle, the voice, our target audience, the key message, everything will come down from that. So in our next slide, we can look at, well, getting right into our first breakout activity. So yes, folks, there will be some participation moments in this presentation where we will ask you to do a bit of work with us. So one way to look deeper at what is our core motivation, what are our motivation goals, is by using a framework we like to call the 5 whys. So using the 5 whys, we're going to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into our goal and to find our root motivation or a root cause or root motivation of our goal. So for example, if your boss asks you to create a social media campaign, our first question should be, well, why? Okay, so I'll run you through this example here. So this example is not really related to communication, but just so you get a sense. So our goal is, I want to own my own business. That is pretty vague. So if we start by asking why, well, maybe your answer is, will allow me to have greater control over how I spend my time. Okay, why would I want that? So why would I want extra free time? Well, so I can have more flexibility in my life. Okay, let's dig deeper. Why would I want that? Well, I will be able to work from home. Okay, why do I want that? And maybe I'll be able to spend more time with my son and daughter. Now let's get to our last why. And supporting my family is the most important thing to me. So here, you can click one more time, I think. We have a root cause of motivation, our goals. So keeping this in mind, this is kind of like our core value at the base of everything of our goal of why we would want something or what motivates us for it. Right. So let's get to our next slide here. So goals we are given as communicators are often pretty vague and not really like goals in themselves, but more like statements of intent. So for example, I want to launch a public health campaign on the importance of closing the lid when you flush the toilet. So that's, you know, I have an intention to do this, but is that really a goal in itself? So we'll dig deeper together to try to find out what the core motivation could be. So our goal could be accompanied with key performance indicators. So for example, we've already answered the first why. I want to reach 20,000 people with this message. Okay, so we're going to break you down into 3 different breakout rooms, and we're going to go through these questionings and ask you to come up with our core values and reasoning behind this. Okay. So I think we'll be ready to split up into breakout rooms. Now in our breakout rooms, there we go, join. So we have about 5 minutes here. Okay. Well, I hope it was a productive session for all of you. We had a great little discussion in our breakout group at the end. So maybe perhaps Michelle and Cass could share what each of their groups came up with. I'll share just briefly what our group came up with as our 5 whys. So the first one would be reduce the amount of particles that people are exposed to. And second, it would be reduce the infections, illness. And then the next one, improve public health. And then the last one, well, we want to reduce the cost for society. So that was one approach to it. And maybe Michelle and Cass could share what you guys came up with.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, I'll just jump straight to the root cause, but we eventually went through, like, you know, there's a breakout and we want to, you know, prevent the spread of infection and blah, blah, blah. But the ultimate root motivation was we just want to keep people safe.
Yeah, and ours went down the same line of thinking because it's an important health message. Why? Going on to increase awareness about communicable diseases. And then the end was improve the population health outcomes overall. We also talked about going down another route, you know, if you were thinking more from a personal side of things, you know, you want to keep your family healthy and, you know, avoid your kids staying home from school.
That's really great. So one of the conversations that was brought up is, well, how do we know when we've found the core motivator? And I think what in our discussion, it kind of came down to, it depends on what perspective you come from. Are you an individual? Are you working for an organization? And then you would look at your organizational goals and base yourself on that. So we kind of all came with kind of slight variations of a similar end message here. So again, this is meant more of as an exercise to kind of think more broadly about our communication goals. And this will come and feed into the next part. So I'm told we're already 2 minutes behind, so I'm going to scoot along. You can try this activity with one of your own goals and see if it makes you think differently about it. So let's move it on to the communication bridge slide. So basically, when we're talking about communication goals, it usually boils down to one of 3 things. So this bridge here is our communication product. So the communication bridge, the idea is to bring our audience from where they are to where we want them to be. So these 3 aspects that are often goals of communication very broadly are change of behavior, change of feeling, or change the knowledge. So take them from what they know to what we want them to know, from what they feel to what we'd like them to feel, current behavior to what we'd like them to do. So this again is very broad. We'll get narrower and narrower. So I'll pass it on to Cassandra to look at our key messages, which we kind of see as our next step now that we know what the purpose of our communication is.
Thanks, RC. So now tool number 2, identify your key message. So with your goal in mind, what do you want to communicate? This is going to be the core, the scaffolding of your communication product, whatever you're developing. So under an exhibition at the museum, for example, there's always a key message that is decided upon, and then everything that goes into that exhibit has to fit under that message. If it's not communicating that message, it's eliminated. Pretty much. And key messages, you know, they can vary. They can be very broad or general, if you will, or they can be very specific. And so it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Next slide, Michelle. Thanks. And so this is a kind of crazy busy graphic. This is one famous attempt to convey a very complex strategy or complex information. It was during a military briefing for the war in Afghanistan in 2010. This graphic was shown in, this is how we're going to win the war type graphic. And the general that was shown the diagram, are explaining this military strategy, is trying to explain it with all this mishmash. And then, a New York Times article said about the incident that he thought it looked like a bowl of spaghetti. There's a lot going on. There's definitely some titles that are sticking out. They've made, color zones or anything, but there is no message here. There's nothing that we can understand from this slide that will help us win a war. And that's exactly what the general then said. He said, when we understand this slide, we'll have won the war. And unfortunately, as you probably already know, we did not win that war, and they definitely had to work better to communicate these strategies. And so, like this real life example, unfortunately depicts, if something is far too complicated, if you're trying to tackle too much information at once, you're going to confuse people. They're not going to understand what you're trying to communicate. And you're most likely, even if you communicate something to them, they're not going to remember it. They're not going to retain that information. And that's really what you want to get at. So moving on to the next one. So what you want to do is take that bowl of spaghetti, throw it in a funnel, and pull out just a single noodle out the other end. You want to just take all of that information and break it down, filter it into a single key message if you can, or several key messages, that you want to communicate, but you want to keep it to a minimum. And so if a topic doesn't fit into the filter, into this communication piece, save it for another communication piece. Break it down into individual pieces. So because you can't talk about everything all at once, you need to narrow down your ideas. So in the idea with that, that bowl of spaghetti war effort thing, that you also have to decide and divide between what your key message is and what your goal or your topic is. So the essential message is different from both your topic and your goal. So the topic would have been, there's a war in Afghanistan, and your goal would have been, we want to win the war. But here, we might convey a key message that is, we need to move our forces into this unprotected region to protect vulnerable civilians against an ambush. That would be a key message, for example. There's this website that's called LOL My Thesis, Laugh Out Loud My Thesis. So the academics here will be able to relate especially. And on this website, you can go in and you can summarize, 5 to 10 years of research into a single sentence. And here's some amusing examples of that. So being anxious about your social status makes you depressed. The actual title of this thesis was Subjective Social Status and Major Depression, a Path Analysis of Biological and Psychosocial Mechanisms. That's a mouthful and not understandable by any means by a non-expert in that discipline. Another example of a key message would be, adults have repeatedly and historically failed children in their care. This affected them somewhat. Fishing isn't sustainable because we catch too many fish. This is the most easily understandable one. Another example, does having more antioxidants make elderly male flies sexier? It doesn't seem like it. I did some stuff wrong, so maybe. This is the most honest one I feel is more representative of sort of the scientific process. And then I think I have 2 more, yeah. I stuffed young rats into frosting cones and asked them how they felt. They were sad. And then the next one is, water flowing through a nuclear reactor gets hot. But in each of these cases, and at least some of them are shown, if you read the actual title of the thesis, it's completely, it's gibberish to a non-expert in that field for the most part. And so you want to keep your message, key message, so that your audience that you're targeting can understand it and that it still hits your goal. So if you wanted to try this out for yourselves or for your own research, head on to Lol My Thesis and you can share your thesis topic if you like. Move on. So in crafting an essential message, we suggest that you do it in this way. You first refer back to your goal that you identified with your 5 whys, and then you think of the one thing that, if there's only one thing in a single sentence that you want to convey to your audience, the one thing that you want them to remember when they walk away, you state that first, and then the second part of the sentence, it's what's at stake. Why should my audience care about this? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to them? Not to you, but who you're actually targeting to say this. So for example, let's say my topic is the oil and gas industry. And let's say this is coming from an industry person. I might say the fossil fuel industry is in decline. That's my one thing. Fossil fuel industry is in decline. This is bad because we're losing jobs. But that's from an industry perspective. But let's say I'm part of an environmental group. Well, I might say the one thing is the fossil fuel industry is in decline. This is good because it represents a switch to cleaner energy sources. And so you can see how the why it matters depends on who's talking and who you're talking to. So a couple more examples. From a scientist's perspective, failure is an important part of science, but one that is invisible to the public. One thing. So in order to prevent young scientists from becoming discouraged from their own failures, we must teach the process of scientific trial and error to school children. We got to start early and build them up to this. And then the following one is actually the key message of today's workshop. You know, our goal is to create more effective communicators. Our key audience are scientists needing to be able to communicate their work to non-experts or just anybody, any targeted group of people. And so our one thing, scientists are now seeing the need to share and communicate their work with people outside their field, including non-scientists. So we need to develop and share tools to teach them how to create their messages and reach a wide audience. A few tips on how not to create your key message. This is an example. This article is about the water quality of the Rideau River. This is something not to do. This is really stating a topic. This is not a key message. There's no one thing in it, and there's no why should the person care. And then the next what not to do is you should care about the chemical toluene, or the chemical structure of toluene, because I'm telling you that you should. Again, this is a topic. It's a bit of a, it's slightly offensive because you're demanding something of someone, and it's not giving you a point of view, and it's not giving you a reason to care about it. What does toluene mean to me? Do I even know what toluene is? And so definitely not a key message. So if we jump to the next slide, then we're into our second breakout activity. So what we'd like to do together is craft a key message. It's basically a 2-part, 1-sentence thing. If the background is Twitter, because it gives you an idea of how short you want to keep it, about 280 characters or less. And so you want to focus on first part of the sentence is your one thing you want to communicate. The second part is why it matters. And so each RC, Michelle and I have some topics that we can try out to do this. So I think we have like Arctic ice, space exploration, sustainable agriculture, and sharks. So amongst the groups, you can decide which of those you want, and then together we'll come up with a key message. So I'll ask Trudy to put us into breakout rooms. Welcome back, everyone. RC, Michelle, how did your breakout sessions go?
It went really well. We were finding it was a little bit difficult to craft a message without knowing who our audience is and without knowing what our goal is. So our breakout session kind of ended up going in that direction. I can't say we have a final key message because that's it. We kind of ended up being like, well, what are we trying to communicate to who? What about you guys?
We came up with 3 possible routes we could take depending on what our goal and our key message was. But one of the ones we have was, sharks are not as dangerous to humans as everyone thinks. So we should maybe just not go around blindly killing them.
It makes sense to me. That's a perfect key message. With our group, I was going to ask Selena if she wanted to share hers with everyone. Our topic was Arctic ice.
Yeah, so I thought Arctic ice is rapidly decreasing due to global warming. This is bad because it decreases species habitat and biodiversity, negatively impacting ecosystems.
Thanks so much, Selena. So everyone is absolutely right. You definitely have to properly identify your goal with those whys before crafting a key message. So we kind of left that open. And deciding who your audience is. So who are you trying to convey that message to? And so that is going to bring us back into the next tool, which Michelle will get to, is identify your target audience.
Yeah, so what have we done so far? We've learned how to identify our goals, and we use the 5 whys as one of many tools you can use to do that. And now we've identified our key message, so that one thing that we want to say and why it should matter. Now, as of last month, the most followed person on Instagram in the entire world is Cristiano Ronaldo, the footballer / soccer player. He's got over 500 million followers. That's got 500 million followers. People watch him, they follow him, they listen to him, they want to be like him. When he talks about a product, people go buy it. When he doesn't even talk about it, when he just wears it, people go buy it. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if Cristiano Ronaldo started talking about how cool science was and how scientists rule and about how he gets encourages his family to vaccinate and get that not being vaccinated was so lame, and that, oh, we should care about global warming, and have you considered buying an electric car? Wouldn't it be nice to have an ambassador like that for science? In fact, wouldn't it be nice to be that ambassador for science? I think we can all agree that none of us here is probably ever going to have the Instagram following that Cristiano Ronaldo does. So we have to be a little more realistic. And the realistic thing is, there's very little information that needs to be communicated to everybody. And if you're trying to do that, you're wasting resources. You're wasting time, money, people power. So instead, what we want to do is we want to maximize the effect of our communications by maximizing the chances that we're going to achieve that goal that we've established. Now, how do we do that? We make sure we're hitting the right people. Now, I can hear some of you thinking, hey, wait a second. There are some things that everybody should know. Things like climate change, vaccine safety, GMOs. Everybody should understand that. Everyone should understand that because everyone's going to be voting on that. They need to be able to understand it to make, good decisions. So when we're working in things that influence policy and public health and safety and the environment, we hear people talk a lot about the general public. Who exactly is the general public? Also known as lay people or citizens. Well, hopefully I can convince you over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so that the general public is actually a terrible audience. And it's actually far more important to be as specific as you can and really notch out a portion of the general public to talk to. And to do that, we're going to start with another breakout activity. So Trudy, if you can put everyone into 3 groups again for about 5 minutes. What we're going to be doing is your facilitator is going to guide you through planning 3 birthday parties. And when we come back from that, hopefully we'll understand why the general public is actually such a terrible audience. I hope everybody had some fun as a party planner, as a break from your day job. So in the first scenario, we were handed this profile and all it said was member of the general public. And I feel like most groups probably stayed pretty generic. Some cupcakes, some balloons, some top 40. What did you do as a gift? maybe a gift card, right?
Money.
It was a pretty bland party, I would say. If it was a party thrown for me, I'd be like, oh, thanks guys, I might leave early now, bye. But in the third scenario, we were given much more detail about the person we were throwing the party for, which was good because we accidentally were serving our person nachos before finding they were lactose intolerant. So good to have that extra bit of detail. I know our group suggested maybe a murder mystery party, and a playlist heavy with T Swift. And if Raven came to this party, she would know that this was a party designed for her. So if this was you, which party planner would you pick? You'd pick the one that was tailored for you, right? And it's the same with marketing. You're going to buy the thing that you're sent through Instagram or Facebook ads or whatever that seems like, oh, this makes sense for my life. It seems like it was like put here for me. And it's the same thing with science communication. You're going to care about and you're going to engage with something that seems the most for you. So narrowing down that audience is just our first step to really understand our audience and what they want to hear and what they're going to engage with. We need to dig in to get to know them. So what does that look like? Well, the first thing you're going to do is select your audience. And that's going to be something that, again, is going to be dependent on your goal. For example, if your goal is to promote the purchase of electric vehicles in Canada, you're probably not promoting that to 6-year-olds who can't buy cars, right? So your goal is going to determine that audience that you are trying to reach. Then, in order to find the best way to reach that audience, you're going to need to do some research. And we'll talk about that in a second. But what this basically comes down to is that no communicator, including us as scientists and science communicators, should spend their limited time, their limited money, their limited resources trying to reach audiences that aren't a priority given your goals. So we're going to go basically straight back into another breakout session in just a second. So we're going to pretend this time we were just party planners. Now we're all going to be astrophysicists. All right. We're doing a lot of career switching today. And we have just published a paper called Dynamical Modeling of Long Period Variable Star Atmospheres. I promise you don't need to know what that means to do this activity. But we're going to imagine we're astrophysicists. This is what we're producing, and we're going to have to figure out what our target audience is. And that target audience is going to go right in the center of that bullseye. Once we've established our target audience, we're going to start loosening our brains and trying to think, okay, well, what other audiences we might not be targeting, but might be interested in this research? And then we're going to go one step further from that to like, okay, maybe not interested in the whole research, but like parts of it they could find interesting, maybe like a snippet here, a snippet there, a cool picture we took with our telescope or whatever. So Trudy, if you can put us back into our breakout rooms for 4 minutes, we're going to see if we can fill in this bullseye. All right, I think everyone should be back in the room. So I think RC and Cass, maybe you can just give me like a head nod, but our target audience was other astrophysicists, right? Yeah. In our group, we were saying there's probably literally 10 people in the entire world that are going to read this paper front to back. So our target audience in this case for this specific communication product is extremely narrow, but that's okay because this paper is getting to the people that need to see it to accomplish our goals. And in academia, our goals are normally what? Bolster the next round of research, using this research, get citations, right? So we're achieving our goal by only hitting these 10 people, and that's fine. We don't need to tell the whole world about it. But one thing that we can notice from this exercise is it's not just our target audience that's going to see it. Just because we are targeting a hyper-specific audience does not mean nobody else will get the chance to look at it, right? In our second ring, we had other scientists like astronomers and physicists and mathematicians, maybe science journalists. In our third rung, the people who scroll through Instagram and see this in a single tweet or a single photo, maybe grade 4s that are learning about space, and let's talk about a new discovery that they had this week. Or, you know, a 400-word article that we're going to see in the newspaper and we'll probably forget about after that, but it was a cool read at the time, right? So the thing to remember here is when you're thinking about your key message and your goal and your communication product, yes, it is very important to have an incredibly specific target audience. That is going to help you meet your goals. But there's no reason that you can't then expand that plan if there's other people you want to talk to. So in this case, you know, this scientific journal, this paper, it gives us credence, it gives us impact within the scientific community, but something like that isn't very accessible to many other people. So maybe we want to accompany it with a press release if there are other audiences outside of our target audience that we want to hit, right? Just because we are focusing hyper specific to accomplish our goals doesn't mean we might not have a secondary goal that we can work towards as well. It also doesn't mean that no one else is going to see it. It just ensures the right people are going to see it. And then, you know, any other benefits we get beyond that is great. So now we have to research our audience. We've identified our target audience. We know how to talk to them. But do we? When we're communicating, there's everything we want to say, and then there's the stuff people actually care about. And we need to find that overlap place. Otherwise, people are just going to go swipe on by what you're trying to communicate. And that's another reason why using the general audience or the general public as your audience is actually a really poor idea. The general public is many groups. They have different demographics, beliefs, sources of information, worldview. They trust or don't trust scientists. They have different motivations. They have different amounts of time. So the bottom line is once you've identified the target audience you want to hit, you need to find out their so what. Why should that specific portion of your audience care? And then communicate to that. Now, I will be the first to admit that getting to know your audience takes a lot of work. It takes forethought, it takes observation, it takes imagination, it takes research. It can involve surveys, it can involve scoping studies, segmentation analyses, creating personas, doing public engagement, having roundtables and forums, observational studies. Now, you're not going to do this level of research if you just want to put out a Twitter post. But if you're doing a multi-million-dollar campaign, this is a really, really important step. Good research will inform the best methods for you not only to reach your target audience. So should I use Twitter? Should I use Facebook? Should I use the television? Should I use a newspaper? But it'll also tell you the messages that you should be communicating because you'll have found out what matters to that specific audience. So another way to think about this is through different lenses. So if we think about our so what, say we have a key message, right? The media is going to look at our key message in a very different way than, say, policymakers. The media's lens is it a good story? Are people going to want to watch it? Policymakers care about what their constituents care about. So if they don't think their constituents are going to care about it, they're not really going to care about it, right? For scientists on that paper, they're going to be saying, okay, well, is this good research that I can base my future research upon? Is it going to affect my work? Is it groundbreaking? Or is it rife with mistakes and kind of actually totally garbage, right? So depending on who you are, you're going to have different so whats. And so depending on who our audience is, we need to find that so what and incorporate that into our communication. Luckily, once we've done this, once we've ID'd our goal and our key message and our audience, every other question about how to communicate actually starts to answer themselves. For instance, if you want to talk to teens about online misinformation, they're more likely to see and trust that message coming from an influencer rather than, say, a federal account. If you're trying to encourage greener lifestyle choices, your call to actions will be different depending on your target audience. An 8-year-old is not buying a car, but they can recycle and turn off the lights. And if you're trying to reach older homeowners about, making upgrades to have a more efficient home, using a television as a platform might be more effective than using something like TikTok, where we're just not finding the 80-year-olds these days. So one final breakout activity for this section to give you an idea of how easy some of these choices are made when you know your goal and your target audience. We're going to switch careers again, and we're going to go into marketing. And I think we're just going to do, Trudy, 2 minutes on the clock for this one. But we have here an exercise ball. Our goal is to sell as many of these balls as possible. And our key message is it's important to incorporate fitness into your life because it'll give you a better quality of life. Each group is going to have a different target audience, and you're going to sell me that ball. So Trudy, 2 minutes on the clock, 3 breakout rooms would be super. Thank you. All right, so maybe I'll just get Cass and RC to share in just a second their kind of marketing pitch. But breakout room 2, we were trying to sell to college age students, and some of the things that we can pitch them about this ball is it's easy, it's cheap. We like cheap when we're students. You can do homework and exercise at the same time. They're great fun at parties. And you can craft that perfect booty to impress your love interest as well.
My group, we were trying to get kids 5 to 10 to want one of these. So we focused more on like, it's fun, it bounces, you can jump on it, you can roll on it, it's bigger than you. It comes in all fun colors. And maybe in our advertisement, we would advertise it on YouTube as part of a commercial in a video that's aimed to kids so that we know we're getting the right viewers. And in the video, they would see kids playing and doing physical activity with the ball and just having a great time. That was kind of our approach.
And our audience was middle-aged adults working from home. And so the approach was in part, alleviate your back pain. It's more ergonomic, so you can use it as a chair. If you're working from home, you're usually sitting at a desk. And so like if you're using that as a chair, then you can also exercise simultaneously. Sitting all day long, you can take breaks, keep your body moving. And if you have it at home, you can also work around your own schedule and plan around other tasks and emphasize, its versatility and mobility and strength as you age. That's pretty much just it.
Great. So all this to say, it's a lot easier to sell something to someone when you know who you're selling it to. Same goes for science communication. Second takeaway point from this, there's nothing wrong with having multiple target audiences. We do this with museums all the time. We could be targeting 2 different target audiences or 3 different target audiences. It just changes how you're communicating to each of these different target audiences. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So we're running a little behind, so I'm going to skip this really quickly. But I just want to point out that we can apply this easily to policy as well. So for instance, if we're trying to talk about limiting human actions on climate change, if that's our key message, and our goal obviously is to decrease CO2 emissions, we can talk about different things to different age groups, and some of them will have overlap, some of them won't, but figuring out what matters to that group and figuring out how best to hit that so what that they care about is the key to them actually taking your communication, absorbing it, and changing that behavior or changing that knowledge or changing that feeling that we talked about right at the start. So RC is going to wrap us up with once you've actually answered these 3 questions and started designing your communication product, here's a couple tips just to make sure it doesn't fall flat.
Great. So we're going to go through this quickly. Presentations always take longer than you plan. So we've established our goal, our key message, our audience. We know everything we need to know. And we've figured out how to best communicate with that audience based on the research we've done, because I don't really know what 20-year-olds are into these days. So I have to research them in order to craft my communication message effectively. So you've communicated, you're crafting your communication product, okay, whether that's a scientific paper, a report, a social media post, a museum exhibition, And our final tools have to deal, our final tools have to do with some of the tips for accessibility. So accessibility, we can go to the next slide. We often think of accessibility as removing barriers for people with disabilities, which is completely true, through tools such as color contrast, font sizes, font style, subtitles, descriptive audio if we're doing video, live interpretation. There's a lot of different things that we do to make communications accessible to people with a wide range of abilities. And recognizing this, so accessibility has universal benefits. I watch everything with subtitles. Maybe they weren't meant for me, but they are sure useful. Okay, example. So thinking about accessibility more broadly in museums has become pretty much second nature to us as science communicators. So it's not just looking at disabilities, but also looking at different things like age. What will be accessible to a 5-year-old will be different than what is accessible to an 85-year-old. Socioeconomic status can have an impact on people's understanding of science, their exposure to science, their exposure to certain things that may or may not help or hinder their comprehension, our schooling, and also languages. So we're in Canada, we're a very multilingual country where some people might not have French or English as their first language. So they might always be reading something through their third, fourth language, maybe. Okay, so just quickly, this next slide here, maybe some of you are familiar with the XKCD comics. So on the right, we have celluloid chemistry is second nature to us geochemists. So it's easy to forget. No. So I think that's something that we all kind of run into. We fall into this trap of believing that what we are very familiar with through our work, we kind of forget that it's not common knowledge for the vast majority of people. So even when they're trying to compensate for it, experts in anything wildly overestimate the average person's familiarity with their field. Okay, so in science communication, especially as scientists, we're very tempted to use the right words, the right terminology, and say, well, everybody understands this. But truth is, most people probably don't. And why is that? We can go to the next slide. So we often forget pretty much things learned, and we remember things learned until grade 4, after which point we pretty much start to forget things. So I don't know much calculus at this point. So assume that your audience knows up to grade 4 about in terms of like knowledge. So trust me, I'll let you know if they know more than that. Okay, and so this here, we're including an example of using plain language, okay, just to fall into this jargon trap, try to get out of this. Often we're thinking, well, we have to use technical terms. If we look at this graphic here, it's a little grainy. You can find it online quite easily. It's UpGoer 5. They are describing all these parts of a rocket using only the 1,000 most common words in the English language. And if they can do that, I think we can do it too. So for example, like the tip of the rocket here, thing to control which direction the escaping people go to, or the escaping people go. Very simple. Sometimes it can kind of complicate it for those of us who know the right terminology, but it makes it easier to understand for everybody else who doesn't know the terminology. And so the next slide, we have this as an activity, but since we're running low on time, we'll just present it to you. You can try your hand at this with your own topics that you want to communicate and see where your jargon traps are. So this is the UpGoer 5 text editor. It can be found at splasho.com/UpGoer5. And it'll have you type something here using only the 1,000 most used words. So 1,000 is 1,000. It's quite fun. You can maybe have a little office challenge with that. I tried to describe photosynthesis and it took me like a good 5 minutes. All right, so that's plain language. So the next thing for accessibility is just being succinct. We often tend to word really wordy. Oh, is it only? Yes, it's only for the English language, that one. I haven't found one for French yet, but it might exist. So being succinct, I know I'm very wordy. We tend to maybe write like a novel style. But if you click the first example here, so this is an example of something long that might be unnecessarily long. Aside from everything else mentioned, if you still can't register for the course, contact our team to help you out. There's a lot of stuff we can cut here and make it a lot more appealing to read. If you still can't register for the course, contact our team. It feels a little drier, but it cuts to the chase, gets to the point, and gets rid of the TLDR phenomenon. So if people aren't reading your instructions, if people aren't reading your stuff, sometimes we have to maybe look at shortening. My favorite quote from my whole university career was a prof who once said, "Every word should be pregnant with meaning," and I will take that to my grave. So next slide, I'll go really quickly. Simplifying the format, super important. How many times we run across infographics where we just don't know where our eyes are supposed to go? What are we supposed to look at first? What is the most important piece of information? So this is an example of a panel from Ingenium Museums. We can see our title, and this is all bilingual. So this is fitting a lot of words in a small space. But it kind of visually takes you through the information, and trying to attempt to replicate that in our communications, having information as like blocks and self-imposed word limits can really, really help. So for example, you can see all of our word limits here. Main text, we never have more than 80 words. So it's always a challenge. All right, and last two tools, okay, really quickly, we've got 5 minutes. Putting numbers more concrete. We have a really hard time visualizing numbers. So if I asked you to picture a stack of 5 dimes, probably fairly easy. If I asked you to picture 120 dimes, might have a harder time. So people are not good at visualizing numbers bigger than 10, and we can't intuitively recognize numbers bigger than 6. Okay, so we need to make them more concrete and through metaphors and things like that. For example, here, based on our goal, our communication goal, we concretize the idea of 6 tons of pollutant per day, or 25 balloons full of toxic pollution for each child in the town. Now, this is maybe a little like scary one, but it really helps you see what 6 tons of pollutants looks like. And another thing to try to avoid is probabilities, so percentages. And rather than using percentages, it's more intuitive to think about a number of events in a specific period of time. And it'll help with fast decision making. So for example, instead of there's a 4% chance of a superstorm versus there could be a superstorm about once every 25 years, our audiences have an easier time understanding that. Last but not least, let's jump into our famous, when we're communicating through PowerPoints and slides. I'll give you 5 seconds to understand this graph while I am talking. So keep trying to understand it. I'm going to keep talking about it. All right, is anybody getting this? Yeah, probably nobody understood this graph. So this graph actually just shows us perceived understanding by students based if you have just audio, if you have audio and visual, and if you have audio, text, and then the other one is audio, text, and a visual. Probably you didn't quite get that. So one thing we recommend is being extremely intentional with figures and graphs when we use them. Figures and graphs from papers are meant to take like 10 minutes to understand. We don't have a lot of space to explain a lot of stuff. But in a PowerPoint, we should draw attention if we're using them to what we want people to get. So I'm going to drive my audience through this. So we've got our perceived understanding out of 3. Audio only is this, and then we'll click again, and then we'll see, okay, I want to show this. Look at how much more they understand with text. And then again, finally, with text and visual, it's only a slight increase. So a slide with text will help people understand. I took you through this graph rather than talking about something unrelated and just keeping the graph up on the screen. Now, lastly, you don't always need to use a graph. You can represent the same information in another way. So here we just represented it with an arrow that increases, and the audio, the volume symbol, volume and text, volume, text, and an image. So this is just an example of how you can think a little bit more about what you are aiming to do with these graphs and figures, and maybe reinterpret them yourself. So those were our main tips. I'll flip it over to Cass. I think we're right about at time now.
Just under the wire. Yeah, I'm just going to wrap this up. So it may sound simple, but I promise taking the time to answer these 3 questions before you start working on a communication product will greatly improve the impact and the relevance of your communication. So hopefully we've equipped you all and you feel more confident to be able to craft just that, and while being accessible, clear, and targeted based on your own research. So on behalf of RC, Michelle, and myself, we thank you so much for participating during the breakout sessions, and we wish you all the best in your science communication efforts.
And if you do ever want to contact us, our contact information is up on the screen. We're happy to help. We do a lot of this at museums.
I had a question. Oh, I had a question if there's a bit of time. That was great. So yeah, thank you. So first of all, yeah, thank you very much. That was really great. I love how you guys kind of mix the sort of activities, breakout sessions with the brief sessions of the information. So that was very helpful. What are your thoughts about like different forms of AI that are being used to kind of like for everybody, I guess nowadays, like such a ChatGPT is one of them, and there's probably more stuff out there, and the usage of these sorts of tools in relation to all that you have just, you know, so beautifully described to us.
If I can quickly give a couple of thoughts, I've been thinking a lot about ChatGPT and how it's going to change my work. I haven't been able to use it myself yet because every time I try to, the server's too busy. But what I would see it being helpful is kind of doing that research on audiences. Like if I can ask it, like, especially if, I don't know if it has the capacity to give statistic information, but sometimes stats that are hard to come by, like what, you know, I don't know, if it knows the number of clicks on a certain type of product or something, or knows something about my audience, I think that would be really useful. And also kind of to know what already exists out there and any gaps, because as far as I understand, these apps are based on what is out there, what is existing, how it was trained. So it can kind of maybe shine a light on what the gaps are in terms of what kind of information and how it's. I don't know if my colleagues have any thoughts.
Yeah, I can add to that. I will say that it's kind of a common thread among the museum industry that we are all very short-staffed, and every one of us is doing like 16 jobs. And so anything that can save us some time and save us some legwork is absolutely a tool that we want to make use of. And so if something like one of these AI tools does have the potential to speed up our research, or to help us draft something, which we can then go in with a red pen and attack, and I don't like this and I do like this, because sometimes it's easier to work from something than to work from nothing.
Right.
That can be very helpful. I also know that we have to be very careful about the images, for example, that we used in copyright. So if there's an AI out there that can create us the perfect diagram, right? Sign me up. I'm ready. I'll buy it. Because it takes a long time for us to develop things like that. Yeah, I personally see it primarily as a tool that is going to make our lives easier. I don't see it replacing us. Like I really don't.
Yeah. I completely agree with RC and Michelle, with the caveat that it's only as good as the information it has access to. It's just the basic way that it functions. It can only learn from the database of information that is put into it. And so, I mean, if you give it access to the internet, for example, you're in trouble because not all that information is accurate, right? But if you get it, if you are the one that's feeding precisely the information that you are allowing it to produce things from, then it can be a very useful tool. And then, like Michelle said, you know, before you actually share that product with the public, we need to go through and double check it with the red pen.